I'm Karl Rabago. I'm the Executive Director of the Pace Energy and Climate Center. It's a project of the Pace Law School up in White Plains, New York. The center has been there for about 25 years, developing policy and ideas for advancing clean energy in New York, in the Northeast region, and around the country. I arrived there about 8 months ago after spending about 24 years in various positions, gaining all kinds of different experience in the electric utility business. And now I have the opportunity to lead a team of economists, lawyers, and others, engineers and others in advancing clean energy policy. We're really lucky that New York is the home to one of the biggest emerging issues in the electric utility industry called the New York Reforming the Energy Vision process. This was launched a little over a year ago, or about a year ago, by the governor and the chair of the Public Service Commission in an effort to advance utility reform towards the next level, to take increasing advantage of the benefits of clean, distributed energy resources like rooftop solar, combined heat and power, automated distribution, or demand management and demand response, and smart grid and microgrid functionalities. These technologies and the services that are related to them offer us a huge opportunity to reduce the pollution associated with getting our electric service, advancing a lot of innovation in the sector. We hope creating a lot of jobs and economic opportunity. So we look at ways to make sure that that vision becomes a reality through good regulation and good policy. What will lead to continued market growth in the energy industry is, as always, a combination of different factors. But the most important ones that are going on right now are, first, the technologies associated with distributed energy resources are falling in price. Solar is becoming more affordable. Information technologies have made energy management more affordable. Same time, customer awareness and demand is growing and is really strong. Right. The second important trend is that customer demand is growing. Customers are becoming aware of and increasingly express demand for an opportunity to manage their energy better, to take some of their energy destiny and, importantly, their energy bills into their own hands. So this, in addition to technology advancing, customer demand is growing. Add on top of that environmental demands. The simple fact is we've got to decarbonize, to reduce the carbon associated with our use and our generation of energy. Clean distributed resources offer huge environmental benefits. And then finally, and perhaps this is most important and ties all those pieces together, I think we have an opportunity to really advance community-based energy, where I don't just have to do it for myself, but I can group together with others in my community or my community of interest to solve problems, to address these issues of cost, to take some of our energy destiny into our community hands and accomplish more together than we could do by ourselves. The hardest thing about what you want to do in the utility business is anything you've done before. The system was established to create a certain kind of business structure that performed in a certain way and had incentives that went for a certain kind of behavior. Mostly, that was investment in large capital assets. In some states around the country, for example, utilities still own generation and the wires, all the pieces of the electric utility service puzzle. But even here in New York, where we've advanced the system a little bit, utilities still have a strong incentive to invest in capital investment, to invest in infrastructure, rather than to invest in service. This is not their fault. That's the system. What we need to do is get off of what's currently a cost-plus system, which encourages utilities to have higher costs and then plus some profit on top, to get to a system where they deliver value through the provision of services. To get to that other side, we're going to have to do three big things. One thing we're going to have to do is get off of cost-based rates and actually get onto value-based prices, just like in so many other parts of our free market economy. The second thing we're going to have to do is encourage more third parties to step into the mix, to provide services and technologies, because they can bring innovation and innovative thinking into what's been a very closed industry segment for a long time. And then finally, we need to sort of create the right incentives for the utility. We need to do that performance-based regulation instead of cost-based regulation, so that utilities can make a legitimate return for their stockholders and have a financial incentive to do what we want them to do. Well, here's the situation. Under the old cost of service-based rate-making formula, the utility is supposed to take all of their costs and pancake them up and decide from that what the cost of 1 kilowatt hour, 1 unit of energy service is. One of the things we've only recently starting to do that we need to do more and more is do exactly that same analysis for what value these distributed resources bring. So we can do that one of two ways. We can either ask a utility, if you had to deliver a kilowatt hour of solar or solar equivalent energy, what would it cost you? The same question on the other side of the coin is, if I made that kilowatt hour of solar electricity on my own roof, how many of those costs would you avoid? And by going comprehensively through, like we know how to do, the energy value, the avoided transmission value, the avoided distribution value, the avoided metering charge, all of those components, we can start getting a glimpse of what value those distributed resources bring. So the chart I put up shows one version of what I call the parfait glass, of all the layers of value that make up this distributed energy resource dessert, if you will. What's interesting about it is that the analytical tools can be applied to the rest of the distributed energy resource universe, which includes storage, whether the stationary kind or the mobile kind, like my Volt, which is basically a battery on wheels, distributed energy efficiency and conservation, savings, distributed security and reliability benefits like microgrids, and distributed smarts, adding intelligence to the electric system in order to make it maximize that value for the dollars we spend. Understanding and developing the customer role in the electric services business is probably the most challenging part. First, we have this historical precedent that for many decades we tried to make people not even think about their electricity, just to be mindless about it. We give them a bill once a month, long after they can do anything about changing how much they use. We have very small plugs and devices that don't tell us how much electricity they use, and no means, unless you're willing to spend a lot of extra money on any given day to figure out whether this or that device is a big electrical user. So we spent a lot of time, and a lot of effort creating a system in which customers are not engaged, which is really interesting because, of course, electricity is so absolutely essential to life in the modern world. People die when electricity fails, even in our most developed countries. Imagine the billion-plus people who don't even have access to electricity around the world. So we've got to engage them in this process. We know that we've, first of all, taught them to think that the utility was going to provide everything. But in fact, with these new technologies, customers can change how they use electricity. They can change the time at which they use electricity, and they can change the price that they pay for electricity. In fact, they can go so far as to be their own electricity generator with solar installations on the roof, or combined heat and power installations for their apartment buildings or their condo developments. With all these new opportunities, we've got to go through an education process and an awareness process, and we have to come up with rates and prices for services that encourage customers to get involved. It's really, really hard to change decades-old mindsets. In some cases, it's generational. You know, the way my dad thought about electricity and the way I think about electricity is very different. I'll tell you the story, actually. You can use this and cut it in because it's a great story. My dad grew up at a little house on Pafford Street in Del Rio, Texas. Typical Mexican-American kid. He remembers when his father hung a wire with a light bulb. He remembers electricity being brought into that old house. He also remembers how proud his father was when my grandfather built another house that had electricity in the walls. And when my dad was raising us, he'd go around the house going, turn on another light. I don't want you to go blind. He was this macho Mexican-American guy who thought that providing for us and not having us worry like he worried was a sign of how he was going to be a responsible father. I came along, and I'm going around the house telling my kids to turn off the lights. I'm plugging in these newfangled compact fluorescent light bulbs, and I'm talking about programming the thermostat. And my dad actually looks at me going like, what kind of man are you? You're making your kids have to worry about this electricity? You're supposed to provide for them. Well, we had conversations over the years, and then he eventually retired and got on a fixed income. And he said, hey, what about those energy efficient lights? So it depends on where you stand. It depends on how you look at it. It takes an educational process. It takes a little while. But if we can harness the power of consumer choice for cleaner energy solutions, then we will do something really amazing in terms of responsibly powering our nation. And customer side of things is a most important place to start.
Great. And one last question. What were your main takeaways from today's discussion?
Every time I get into one of these discussions, my main takeaway is how many people are working on this. And even though we come at it from different perspectives based on our business interest or our policy thinking or our politics, we tend to end up in the same place, which is we need to finish this transformation process of the utility industry, use the forces of markets and competition, take care of customers who have a hard time having their needs met, but we can move forward. And there's a positivism in these discussions that recharges me every time I engage in them.